jump in and let's go through the book is broken up into 6 main lessons, right? So they're the chapters of it, but they're describing them as the lessons that the rich dad, essentially his friend Mike's father, taught him, right? When it comes to finances, that his dad, who he describes as the poor dad, did not teach them. Although did bring in income, worked as a teacher and had that. But the difference being really that rich dad, poor dad, if you think of it as financial literacy, that IQ versus not having the financial literacy and not having the IQ around what that finances look like, right? Which is where I found myself prior to reading this book and still working towards where I would have been in that poor dad category with just the language, the thought process, and kind of how I viewed money. So the very first lesson we dive into is the rich don't work for money. For those of you that have read through that particular lesson, what were your big takeaways? Well, this is a smart group.
So something that I thought about while I read this is because, like, in the book, he gives the example, like, he was like a 10-year-old kid or whatever, and the rich dad made him and his friend work for free rather than paying them. And it kind of opened their minds to business ideas and how to make money. And they end up setting up a little comic book store thing, didn't cost any money, paid a little sister to let people in. And it was this great little thing. And they only thought of it because they weren't getting money. And I have a couple of rental properties that I bought years ago when I was way more poor. I had student loans. I didn't make as much as I did now. And I bought 2 rentals, and I haven't done anything for like 6 years. And I'm like, why am I not doing this? And that kind of like hit me, like I'm right now working for money rather than trying to figure out, like, okay, what can I do? Like, let's be scrappy and go live in a new place or partner up or do something else so I can, like, not work for money, but be creative and try to go get another rental.
Love that. Awesome. What else were some big takeaways from the first lesson? The rich don't work for money.
I feel like the big takeaway for me from that chapter is the fact that my house is not an asset. Like, so many times, like, even when we talk to our clients, we're like, oh yeah, like, your house, it's your biggest investment. Like, it's such an asset. And it's not, because my house doesn't make me more money. Like, and I'm not saying I'm going to sell my house because I love my house. However, yeah, now I just have to find other assets to make that money instead. Like, I feel like that's a big mindset shift, especially when we're also emotionally attached to our homes.
What was your initial thought when you had read that? Because they dive into it more later on, but just the initial sentiment of it, what was your thought?
I think my first, to be completely honest, like, I think initially, like, there's almost a reactionary, like, what are you, no, that can't be, like, this is an asset. It's like, it's gaining in value. And I think because we want to feel like we've done the right thing, that we're, our net worth is going up because of our house, that, like, the knee-jerk reaction is to just kind of not even accept what he's saying.
Yeah, that's an awesome perspective, because that's how I felt too. Like, the way I described it, I wrote in my notes was like, I took offense to it, right? Like, I kind of was like, what is this guy talking about, right? I was not prepared to hear it as going through the journey, as him describing that settlement, right? Of knowing that difference and moving into it. What were some other takeaways?
As I had the same reaction to my home not being an asset as you guys. And as I worked through that, I did come to the realization, even though your house may not be an asset, it may be the leverage you need to buy that asset, right? Like as your house increases in value, that additional equity might be the thing you use to buy that investment property, that asset.
Well, so the question becomes, when does it become an asset?
In my mind, when you sell it, because it doesn't make money for you until you pull money out of it. Whereas an investment property, you pull money out of it. If you have a rental, you're pulling money out of that on a monthly basis. If it's cash flowing, right?
Yeah, that was, I would love to hear the group's perspective. That's what I thought. And I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer. I don't remember reading that in the book or going through it, right? Of like, for me, I was kind of with you, Paula. I thought, well, it really doesn't ever become an asset. It's the money becomes an asset once you sell the home. And that gap between what you owe and what the equity was is essentially what becomes the asset, which is the cash.
Who's all invited to the people?
Hi, Emily. There we go.
Sorry.
Got her. Oh, I got her.
Got it. So for me, one of the things I wrote down, page 44, I really love that statement. I've met so many people who say, oh, I'm not interested in money, yet they'll work at a job for 8 hours a day. That's a denial of truth. If they weren't interested in money, then why are they working? And I really love that from the first lesson. Anything else from the first lesson? How about you, Megan? What did you take away?
No, I love that too. What you pointed out on page 42, like, I'm not interested in money. And then he covers it by saying, I work because I love my job. And then they go on to say, like, so what do we do? Work until all traces of fear and greed are gone. He says, no, that's a waste of time. Emotions are what make us human, but be truthful about your emotions and use your mind and emotions in your favor, not against yourself. And that, to me, that was like a direct, you could almost like fill in, that's the summary sentence of The Psychology of Money, like chapter 1. Like, no one is crazy, right? Like, you like acknowledge that you're human and everything that your knee-jerk reaction to financially is inside of you for some reason, like your history, the way you're taught to think about money. But then be cognizant of that and be able to manipulate that into what you actually want your outcome to be. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's like, and I know we're not to that chapter yet, but I think it's the very next one. The savers are losers. Maybe it's the third one. But savers are losers is another knee-jerk reaction where you're like, wait a minute, I don't like, is that right? Can that be right? But then when you think about, if you saw the introduction and all of his little graphs from the introduction about like the dips in the stock market, when the stock market crashed the 3 times in the last like decade, and then what actually happened, quantitative easing, right? Which was like not even a word back before that existed. So quantitative easing was like invented while I was in college. That's how old I am. And so Paula's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. But anyway, that is like incredible because it is almost like prophetic that, the government's going to come in like quantitative easing and just like print money so that our interest rates stayed at almost 0. So literally savers are losing because you're not able to accrue interest if the interest rates are almost 0, which is not possible. But how many of us grew up like, in the 70s or the 80s, and that was like the golden egg, like work hard, save your money. It's like almost this very counterintuitive to how most of us grew up generationally thinking about growing wealth and how do you get ahead in society. So I think I might have skipped ahead a lesson or two, but that was really my big one, was like, wait a minute, can that be right? Like, we're always talking about saving. But when you think about it, you can't get ahead if the interest rate is 0. Saving your money.
but we were raised in the era when the interest rates were 13%.
Right.
So we were making a lot of money.
So it was generationally correct, right? Like save your money, get ahead. Like, but you can't when the interest rate's zero. You have to do something else.
Now we have to go shopping and buy stuff.
Yeah, so true. And I obviously I didn't have money when the interest rates were that high to be saving, not really. But my parents raised me, right? So like that knowledge was sound. It's not that they were not paying attention, but that's just the training I received as a young person, which is not valid in our market today.
And how many of us, you know, as when we were younger, our parents were talking about, hey, are you taking into account inflation? You know, like whenever I had a great opportunity when I was in 3rd grade, and this book is what reminds me of it, because my best friend's dad, he was the CEO of a huge national auto parts store that's still around, and you know, multimillionaire. He kind of mentored me at a young age, but we were in 3rd grade and he read us The Richest Man in Babylon. And the things that Dennis would talk about at that age, like none of my friends, like that was never a part of a conversation. And when we, like, this has me thinking like I need to sit with my 13-year-old and like break some of this out for her to give her a little bit stronger foundation. We coach and we talk all the time. However, am I instilling in her these concepts that might not be aligned with what is shared culturally for the most part?
Way to take it to your kids. Like my kid's oldest one is about to be 4, still only 3, but this kid's 9. Like they're talking about this is like a 9-year-old. Like that's young, but how amazing. It made me think of that guy. Y'all know that guy. What's his name? Who's like, my dad wouldn't pay me, what do you call it when you get money for nothing? An allowance, but instead he paid me for every book that I, like business book that I read. And then he was like a millionaire by the time he was 12. Y'all know who I'm talking about? Like some kid. Anyway, that's what made me think of, because like, wow, if you start at 9, like you have some financial literacy really before, like there's some adults who don't have financial literacy like this. So yeah, great point, David.
I know there's a Rich Dad, Poor Dad book for teens. There's also like a little comic book type one for younger kids too.
So cool.
And for those of you that's been with us a while, Heather Jennings hopped on here and said she's playing the game with her kids.
Was that this game? Is that?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So different book, right? He writes a follow-up book, Cash Flow Quadrant, which we'll go into next, but that's where the game is based off of. So I love the fact Megan brought it up, so we'll head to there. So the next lesson was why teach financial literacy, or the bullet point would be financial literacy, right? What does that mean, and why is it important to us? Thoughts around that lesson and what it means?
I think around that conversation, we, you know, normally whenever we're developing as kids, we learn to speak whatever our native language is within the first couple years of life, right? Say worst case scenario, 3. Yet, if we're going to talk about real financial language, it's 3 decades until someone can really kind of speak. A lot of times in our current American culture, a lot of people aren't really versed and they don't understand that language or what any of that stuff means because no one's really poured it into them, or it's not like in their circle unless they have someone who's mentoring them that can speak that language, can talk it to them.
Yeah, even the basic stuff around finances, they don't learn in school. It amazes me how some people can even function in this world because they've never been exposed to anything around money.
I think that's new because when I was in school, I remember the best class that I had was my social studies class. And we really delved into like running your own home and buying toilet paper. It was a big project and all of that. It was the best class ever in high school. And I don't think they teach that anymore. And they really should, because it's excellent. How to write a check, which isn't applicable anymore. But I mean, really detailed stuff on finances is not out there. So weird.
Well, then for some reason, we don't talk about it either. It's like this weird topic that you're not allowed to discuss with each other. Like, I can't tell you how much money I make or where I spend my money or what I save. But really, like, that's the solution to helping more people. Like, if you didn't get it when you're young and you're seeing bad examples probably everywhere as you're older, like, how do you really get better? It's hard.
Andy made a really good point. The wealthy talk about it. They're not there to brag about it. They're there to talk about it, like have great conversations about it.
Well, I think people grow into the conversations we create around them. And for a lot of us, right, very much so, the conversations around us is we don't have financial literacy. So therefore, we're only repeating the knowledge to our kids and those around us, right? Our influence, the same things we've heard, right? Which is get a job, go to college, save money. I mean, 401k, like all the stuff when we go down through it. And I think that's where this book really hits home, right? The simple lesson, rule one, the only rule when you look at that chapter to know is you must know the difference between an asset and a liability and buy assets, right? Like if we could just teach our kids that. And Gary Keller actually touches on this on one of the episodes when you listen through on the podcast, Think Like a CEO, on this last one, he actually dives into that of do kids know the difference between an asset? You know, he kind of uses shoes and he goes into analogy, but I think it's like episode 2 or 3. But they sum this up beautifully because the simple observation is the rich buy assets, the poor only have expenses, and the middle class buys liabilities they think are assets. What conversation could we have with ourselves and those around us that defines those three? And which category are we?
Yeah. I've been told several times through my life that a car is an asset. It drives me crazy every time I hear that.
How many of us have lived like this story? It's not a story, but like the pictogram on page 76, right? Like your income goes up, your expenses go up. And then he does have a little story with it. It's like you're married, now you're living in a cramped apartment, you're going to get the bigger house. Like now you need a car because you're further from work. And like then the baby's coming. Like you just keep acquiring a bigger lifestyle, even though your income's growing, like your liabilities are growing too. And then, I mean, that is like bringing back to full circle what Paula said. It's like you're acquiring what you think are assets that are actually liabilities, and your expenses are going up, and you're like, how am I making twice the money, but I still don't have more money? And it's like this whole cycle. Like I've lived that. I don't know about you guys, but I've lived that where you're just like, this is impossible. I'm making so much more money now than I did when I was 20. Like, how do I not have more money? But it's the perfect example of how that happens.
And if you think about it, we are set up, our economy is set up to operate in that manner.
Yep.
Not only economy, but culture as well, right? Yeah. Look at all the advertising that we're attacked by in every direction on every single platform ever. And it's always like this consumerism, but all of the consumerism is based on, you can't even say depreciating assets because truly they're liabilities. And that word's thrown around a lot, depreciating asset. A car's a depreciating asset. No, it's a liability. Bottom line. So, and we're all inundated and polarized by it so much that you just take it, it's like parental imprinting, but it's cultural. We just eat it up. When, like personally with me, I went and did the opposite. So like I've gained assets, and then anything that was a liability for me, I've taken off the board and off the board, and it's slowly gotten down and down and down and down and down, thanks to my coaching with my Rainmaker. And at this point, like I don't have payments for any. The only thing that I have is this one mortgage payment now, and that's it. I don't have any other financed anything, no credit card debt, no nothing. And yeah, it was work to get there. However, I'm poised to push forward with more assets.
Once you realize what's happening, right? Like you can reverse it. But how many people never realize what's happening? I feel like, what book was it we just read? Oh, it's The Miracle Morning, where they're like 95% of people like never get off this hamster wheel because they don't have the financial literacy to like even understand how. It's wild.
Well, I think you're taught.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, you're taught, or at least my upbringing was my dad. My dad was, he worked really hard. He set the pace for kind of the family as the primary breadwinner. And when we asked for things, he told us to get a job, you know, cutting grass, babysitting, you name it. And that's how you earn things, is you work for them and you get paid for them. And interesting in this lesson is the opposite with the rich dad that says you need to get a job to learn something, not earn something, which is completely against kind of our nature, or at least the way that people were brought up. So very interesting in terms of the literacy when it comes to that philosophy.
Yeah, the book even mentions that school does a great job of creating employees, right, and not employers, which was fascinating.
Yeah.
And mind you, it's also the games and TVs, right? Like my big reflection is my daughter used to play this life simulation game. Have you guys ever seen these things like on Android, Apple, all that, like these little games where you like take over a life or it's a simulation? Anyway, she would play those, or the Sims. That was a popular computer one. And if you think about it, all of that was conditioning us that the more money you would make, the more things you could buy. And isn't that interesting how for those of us who played it or liked it, like Sims is a popular game based on that very theory that we are getting taught in school.
Yeah, I mean, let's take the stimulus money. I'm wondering how many people just bought something. Probably not very many invested it. So, you know, I mean, dad's up there telling everybody, you're getting money in your account, go spend it.
Yeah, that's what the government wants us to do, right? Because it stimulates the economy, right?
Yep.
So I'm going to pause a second, because what did you guys do? Like, I'm on this investing journey. I'm just learning and really starting to break through. And so I read this, right? And now I'm kind of really looking at what's a liability, what's an asset, like how am I viewing this? So what did you guys do on your net worth tracker? Because I'll be honest, second time reading through this, I haven't done anything yet. And I have some questions and I wonder, what did you all do?
It's a great question. I have also not done anything yet, but I was like, oh, hot damn, like, should I move some stuff around? Like, you know, in a traditional accounting sense, there's just places you put things, right, that aren't necessarily assets, but that are on accounting balance sheet are assets.
I had the same thought too, and I'm leaving mine on. Like our cars are on there. Our cars are totally paid for. Yet each month they depreciate in value. And I want that conscious reminder that I own this thing that every month is depreciating in value. It's even had me thinking, do we really need 2 cars?
What I thought where my mind
with one.
Yeah, and that's exactly like my mind went to, and with a house it's maybe different, but with things like a car, I was like, okay, well then it's not really, the car is not the liability. Like living someplace where you need the car is the liability. Like then you have to pay for transportation. So like what is the answer? Like you have to live more conscientiously about, you know, how are you going to spend your money? Like what do you need?
Buy a used car, buy a junker, use the car for 30 years instead of 10, you know, I mean, those things, but that's not fun.
Right.
One of our cars is a 2005 Dodge Neon. They don't make Neons anymore, if you didn't know. And it was bought new. However, like we've had it for 16 years. So
Right.
like, yeah, don't upgrade your car every 2 years or 3 years.
And see, I have mine on my net worth, my car, even though it depreciates, like I update that value. Usually quarterly, I'll go in and look at it, and kind of go Kelly Blue Book or something like along those lines. But yeah, this book opened my mind because I'm like, well, maybe I should just completely take it off. The same thing with the house. Like, am I tricking myself into exactly what this book calls a rat race later on?
And it should be noted too that, from my experience as a real estate appraiser over the past 20 whatever years, that even though you do have these assets, right, like we were talking about, like the home you own, but it does have a depreciation rate, and it does have an anticipated life expectancy to it. And every hour, every minute, every second, every day, that depreciation comes into play on that home. And there's going to have to be some measure of finance pumped into that. And that's what I think is so supportive of, it's not an asset until it's sold. And then that equity is your asset at that point, because really it's a liability.
Yeah, 100%. And can I give you another perspective, or maybe just expand on what you said? So my question is, whose asset is it actually when we hold the mortgage?
Thanks.
The banks, right?
You don't own it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the question is, it is an asset where to take Gary Keller's word, right, where the myth understanding is that whose asset is it? And I think for most of us, we put it under our asset, when reality of it is the asset is the banks, the lender, until it's paid.
Has anyone here ever heard Gary Keller talk about assets versus liabilities? Like, he has some incredible things to say, like quantum leap or anything. I can't remember where I heard him say this particularly, but he was talking about assets versus liabilities. And he said, like, once I understood the difference, I quit buying liabilities everywhere that I could instead buy an asset. And he gives examples, and like, man, it's nuts. He's like, I won't buy a whiteboard holder. Like, instead, I buy French art easels because they appreciate in value and you can sell them anytime for more than you bought them for. I retrofit them for my whiteboards and I put them on there because now I have an appreciable asset. I'm like, hot damn, that man is like serious. Like, here you have like one of the richest people I've ever met, right? And he's like, won't even buy an easel for his whiteboard because that's a waste of money. Like, he's going to buy a French art easel because those are the ones you can resell for more money.
That's what he was talking about on his couch on the Think Like a CEO episode on this latest one. That's what he's saying. He has this couch, which is now vintage and worth more, and he doesn't want to sell it because he knows he can always sell and get more money than he paid for.
Like, wow, he's just like so thoughtful. Like, rich people get rich because they think about it.
Yeah, and that's the idea of financial literacy, right? If we can just master that one rule and know the difference and have some awareness around the decisions we're making, I think majority of people would be better off, right? And by better off, I just mean that's relative to you, but a difference in state than where you're at financially, whether that's a little or a lot.
I feel like there's an idea, and I can't remember the exact phrase. However, you make money by holding on to money, right? Like talking about like P&L. Like, your profit is the money you don't spend. You make money by holding on to it and not spending it.
Yep.
Yeah. It's all about how much money you keep.
Well, I thought it was interesting, even in the book. I mean, this wasn't called out, but he went into descriptions of his rich dad's house, and it did not sound like an awesome house. Like, it sounded run down. His son thought he was poor. Like, everything was wrong with his house, but then he had all of these businesses, all of these assets. He accumulated a lot, but they were never liabilities, and he didn't even worry about fixing up his house. Like, he was very set on just getting his assets and not his liabilities. And I didn't even mention it, but I thought it was interesting as he explained it. It's like he was living what he was teaching.
So true, Cameron. I read that and I was like, how am I going to convince my wife we can't do the upgrades?
I think there's a balance though. Fun has to be in your life. So he didn't address the balance of the fun. I feel like that was missing for me anyway. There's no life that can be that boring, right? But what's all the money? What, I mean, you have all that money, now what? You haven't learned how to spend it.
Well, and he talks about like buying, I don't know if it was a Ferrari or some other car. Like you buy it with the money that your assets make you, not with the money that your job makes you.
Yeah.
Yeah, in some ways, it kind of ran a little bit with Dave Ramsey's teaching. Not so direct, but in the ways of like you earn the cash through your assets to be able to purchase the product in cash or whatever it is. He talks about in a later chapter about when him and his wife wanted to buy a bigger house, which they wanted, and they did not count it as an asset. He knew he had to go out and acquire additional assets that would cover the mortgage payment. And that's the way he viewed doing that expense.
So one thing I did was I wanted to do just something that would make me happier, and then also like play into this a little bit. So I replaced all the lights in my house with 10-year color changing LEDs, right? So I calculated out the cost of incandescents and replacing them over 10 years. I looked at the cost to replace all the light bulbs. So I came out on top at the end of the day, and I get to change, like my inside of my house can look like a club if I wanted to, right? So I got something cool that was fun and interesting, and also was at the end of the day and long term, it was a cost savings to me. So there's a way to work it where you can still have fun and still be economical and conscientious of your money.
Yeah. And it's no different than a budget, right? Like most people think the idea is to constrict you, and the real idea is to just bring you awareness about where your money is going and where you want it to go. And I think Megan touched on this, which I love, which was brilliant, right? Like, I think she said your husband like loves coffee, and that's okay to love coffee and to spend as much as you want, as long as you're purposeful and understand that that's what you want to do and knowing the difference.
It's a lot, y'all, but we just budgeted in. It's a lot.
And I think that's all we're saying here, right? Is just knowing the difference and bringing that awareness and making the decision about which direction to go. All right, lesson 3, mind your own business. What were your guys' takeaway? This was a really short little lesson.
I think this was the one that Keeping Up with the Joneses came into my head as I was reading it. I know so many people that have to keep up with all their friends, all the people they know. They have to outdo everybody they know.
Yeah. This is the one Liz was just mentioning, and I loved it. It's on page 114 in my book, but it says a true luxury is a reward for investing in and developing a real asset. For example, when my wife Kim and I had extra money coming from our apartment houses, she went out and bought her Mercedes. It didn't take any extra work or risk on her part because the apartment house bought the car. She did, however, have to wait 4 years while the real estate investment portfolio grew and began generating enough extra cash flow to pay for the car. But the luxury, the Mercedes, was a true reward because she proved she knew how to grow her asset column. That car now means a lot more to her than simply another pretty car. It means she used her financial intelligence to afford it.
That's very interesting. So we have different versions of the book.
Oh.
My 114, I had financial intelligence simply having more options. If the opportunities aren't coming your way, what else can you do to improve your financial position? Which is the lesson that the rich invent money. We should have clarified that. Did not know there was different versions of the book.
Not either.
Now we know. Now we know.
This is where I think it's a cultural thing again. Those of us that are older, we didn't grow up with credit cards. So let's say you wanted something and you couldn't afford it yet. You either saved for it or you put it on layaway at the store, in which case the store held on to it until it was paid off. Well, then as we got older, like my kids all grew up with credit cards, right? So you go and get immediate gratification and then you pay for it. It's like a whole culture shift from when I was growing up to when my kids were growing up.
Yeah. Well, whichever version I have, one of the things I highlighted was there's a big difference between your profession and your business. And then he goes on page 89 and outlines what that is. And being fully transparent, I had a lot of issues with this one and challenges, like, and thoughts around it. My dad owns a successful dry cleaning business, and I always inspired to be a business owner, right? Because he had this successful dry cleaning business across multiple locations. But then I realized the difference in reading this book is that he also always had a job. My dad cannot walk away from the dry cleaner, even from this day, and it run. Right. And we go in and he goes, there's a big difference between your profession and your business. Often I ask people, what is your business? And they will say, oh, I'm a banker. Then I ask them if they own the bank, and they usually respond, no, I work there. Right. In this instance, they have confused their profession with their business. And so my dad does own the business and he has a job. Right. And that changed my perspective going into what I want to do in the future. Because the true definition of a business owner, then I need to mind shift is not working in it, but having something actually where I'm excluded from it and taking the money like an asset, right? And treating it like an asset where I'm not working.
I think that's kind of the takeaway that I had from that part. And it really, I think that's the part that really hit me because, so I've been a teacher all my life up until this year. And I really was never interested in being a business owner. But then now I've gone into full-time real estate, and I'm thinking about, reading this book. I was thinking about, well, how could I have a profession and a business, and what would that look like? And it kind of inspired me to think about buying there's a tutoring center that my friend is looking to sell. And so now I'm kind of thinking about how could I buy this tutoring center and, have someone else run it where, I was still impacting education and students and whatever, but then, being a real estate agent for my job, I guess, I don't know, but that's really got me thinking about a whole lot of things that I don't understand, and I'm trying to move forward in that. And this is just kind of my first little baby step into it. So
we're reading Cash Flow Quadrant next, right?
Yeah, that would be a good one.
That is 100% this conversation is that book, which is like my favorite book, by the way. So I'm very excited about that. Read it like 4 times. Can't get enough of it.
Cameron will be leading next month's discussion.
Well, I listened to it. So I've never actually read a word, but I've audibled it like 4 times.
Same thing.
It's really good because it goes into detail what this book mentions, but this book is more of the story and the background, and that book really dives into like the formula and the mechanics of it.
Yeah, and exactly that. Buying the business, have someone else run it, still do your thing. I mean, that's exactly that book. So
And Angela, I will say that is no baby step. Like that is complete mind shift. And I love that big thinking you're doing. So if anyone hasn't told you, I'm at least proud of you. That is awesome. The first thought and mindset of like where you're going and thinking and the good it can do of having the tutor. That's amazing. So that in itself was worth reading through this book if it generated that thought. That's awesome.
Thanks. I'm struggling with it, and I'm terrified because I've always had that mindset of, get a job, have a safe, stable job, and save money, and that's always been my thinking, and so I'm really terrified of doing anything like this, but I'm trying to learn more about it and move towards it.
I'm with Cameron. Go through this book and then head into a cash flow quadrant as soon as you can. Be a good one. All right. So what do we got? 13 minutes left. This has been a great conversation so far around this book and the topic. So the last is taxes, the rich invent money, which we've touched on a little bit. And then the last lesson was work to learn around there. What are your guys' final thoughts on some of those chapters or some key takeaways we haven't discussed yet?
I'm also super intrigued now about S Corps and how they work. So I want to learn more about that.
What about nonprofits? Nonprofits, because there's a big why driving that too, by the way. I can hear it in your voice. There's passion behind like what you're talking about. And, that may be another avenue that could come into play, depending on how you run your business and where your money filters through and what choices you decide to make with that. It could be a financial win for you and also a community impact win on a large scale, depending on how big you want to think about it.
Yeah, as a side note, that's where even the book talks about how the rich dad was not a really highly educated guy, right? It explicitly explains several times that he just had a lot of good people around him that were smarter than him helping, which I can completely relate to, right? I don't know if anyone else can on here, but absolutely I build everything off of what I've learned from others, right? And what they've taught. So a good CPA, Angela, or someone who's done it or talked to would be highly recommended, right? And you're looking for someone who's a planner, not just preparing taxes, right? Like not HR block where they're just going to tell you how to prepare. You're looking for a planner that has an idea of how to support you would be helpful.
You should Google Mark Kohler. He's a CPA and attorney that is all about tax info. He's got a ton of YouTube videos, and I learned a lot of my stuff from him. Mark Kohler with a K. And he's got a podcast. He's an interesting guy. He's on the radio. I like him.
What happens with the amount or percentage of taxes paid by an entity? We'll use the United States, right? A corporation is the same thing as a human being in the United States for all intents and purposes. So what happens with the trend of the amount of taxes paid by an entity like that? It goes up and up and up and up with income, and then at some point there's a diminishing point of return, and then you see as education, money, and other leverage points come into play, then that percentage of overall take that's going out in taxes goes down, 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 down. So you have these huge corporations, there's a billion great examples. However, they pay very little in taxes by comparison to what, say, a middle-class household would pay, right? Their percentage is much less, but that's because they've got all these pools of strong people, intelligent people, incentives, all that kind of stuff that come into play. And so ultimately, as that entity grows and grows and grows, even though its profit is also growing with it, the percentage or amount going out for taxes decreases over time.
Yep. Well, cash flow quadrant, we'll talk about that in more detail. The reality of it is, like David is describing, is that if you are an employee, the more you earn, the more you'll be taxed. And if you are an employer, the more tax advantages, or more tax, things you can take advantage of, which means you're paying less.
I really love the way he explained it. I guess it was simple enough for me to figure out. He said that, as an individual, you get paid and then you pay, or no, you work, you pay taxes, or you get paid, you pay taxes, and then you pay your expenses. Whereas a corporation gets paid, pays their expenses, and then they pay taxes. And so I'm really into that. I want to figure that out for myself, but it's really hard for me to get my head around, because I'm a high school math and science teacher. I'm a smart person. I can do like high level math, and this financial stuff is completely beyond me. I have no clue. So, I'm really excited getting started into it. And now I'm super excited to read Cash Flow Quadrant.
We skipped over it, and I thought they explained it eloquently on page 30. Well, mine is page 34, because I've always felt this. So if you think I'm the problem, then you have to change me. If you realize that you're the problem, then you can change yourself. Learn something and grow wiser. Most people want everyone else in the world to change but themselves. Let me tell you, it's easier to change yourself than everyone else. I think it's brilliantly said, and absolutely has held true in my life of those times when I've not gotten very far, right? When I'm always blaming the others, as opposed to looking right at myself and thinking, what can I change, or what can I do differently?
And you know what? I don't think that anyone that was in the rich dad category would ever be one who would, who their peers would say, yeah, no, they definitely prescribe to a victim mindset, right? Those types of people are the ones that are surrounded with other people who take ownership, and they take ownership on themselves, their decisions, and the results of those decisions, as opposed to the impact that someone else's decisions are having on me.
One of the biggest takeaways I had, and it doesn't completely pertain to finances. However, I was reading last night, and it's the concept of the profit first. You have your money, you pay yourself first, and then you pay your bills. And if you don't have enough to pay your bills, then you just get creative and make more money. And I've read Profit First and everything. However, I was thinking about that, and I was like, I need to apply that to my own life and like my time. Like, I take care of everyone else first, and then I have no time left over to take care of what I need to get done. And so that was actually probably one of my biggest takeaways from this book. Doesn't even have to do with finances. It has to do with how I spend my time.
Awesome. We have 5 minutes left. What are we talking about next week?
Good reminder, Megan.
You guys are actually here, so you get to have a vote on it. What topics do you guys want to talk about?
I get a vote, I vote yes.
So Michael brought up something on one of our group calls this week about, we were talking about like 36 touches campaigns. And he wanted to know what touches people are using that are working. Like, I'm a huge proponent that direct mail works better than email these days. So what about something around that?
Thoughts? I see eyebrows raised, but like no enthusiastic nodding, so I'm not really sure what that means.
And maybe that's like a smaller piece of a bigger topic.
Like database conversion.
I mean, because we're about to go into Q2, we could do something with like client events, you know, yeah, what are we doing to make touches with our sphere and our top, you know, lead gen sources?
This coming from Hannah, who just had a reverse 100 where 2.5 conversations led to 1 referral. 1 referral for every 2.5 conversations.
So yeah, need something for Q2 now.
So 36 touch tracking return on investment, nailing it down to like what's ones that have high conversion that we can take.
Yeah, I mean, I know we all need leads. So how to keep those coming in and keep the pipelines full, you know, coming into springtime. You know, we're seeing it slow down with spring break this week. So it's just like, how can we stay on top and keep the leads coming in and keep all of us employed? So
how do we shift our marketing in the COVID era?
So database marketing, database turnover, database conversion.
mm-hmm.
Cameron wants to talk about this too, I know. It's a big thing.
That's all I ever talk about lately.
Okay, let's do it then. So next week, database marketing and conversion. Like
Awesome.
specifically to your database.
See everyone next week.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.